Afternoon, everybody. I'd like to call to order the Thursday, December 6, 2018 Watertown Board of Adjustment meeting. Joe, can I get a roll call?
Hanson? Here. Ford?
Here.
Stein?
Here.
Dolly?
Here.
Kays?
Here.
Dargis Johnson?
Here.
Colhane is absent, Oletsky is absent, and Olson is absent, but we have a quorum.
First item on the agenda is the approval of the November 8th, 2018 minutes. Can I get a motion?
All.
Motion by Mr. Stein, second by Ms.
Second.
Ford. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Second item on the agenda is a conditional use permit. Joe?
Okay. The applicant is Watertown Plaza LLC. The property address is 1300 9th Avenue Southeast. This is a conditional use request pursuant to zoning ordinance 21-28033 bar or tavern. Applicant seeks approval for this parcel located in the C3 Highway Commercial District to be eligible for alcoholic beverage licenses on sale and or off sale, which may include video lottery, in order to sell, serve, and allow alcoholic beverages to be consumed on this premises, contingent upon compliance with the purpose of the C3 zone, 21-2801, location 2.0102, 21.0202 2B7A through H, which is specific rules governing individual conditional uses, and any other ordinance regulations that may apply. Staff finds that all public notice requirements have been met, and that bar tavern is a listed conditional use for the C3 Highway Commercial District. The definition of bar tavern is any establishment, including restaurants and gambling establishments, licensed to sell alcoholic beverages for consumption upon the premises where sold or provided. The term bar or tavern shall also include establishments licensed to sell alcoholic beverages for consumption off the premises where sold. This board is tasked to determine if satisfactory provision and arrangement exists regarding the following. Section 210202 2B7A through H is specific rules governing individual conditional uses. This includes ingress and egress, off-street parking loading, screening, buffering, signage, exterior lighting, required yards and open spaces, and general compatibility with the neighborhood. Section 2.0102 location is actually exempt from this location. This is an exempt restriction, so we don't need to consider that. Chapter 2163, off-street parking and loading requirements and engineering design standards. Information was not provided determining the number of existing off-street parking spaces and aisles, but the building official is confident that this meets all requirements. Chapter 2165, outside storage and display requirements for specific uses. There is no request for any out-of-the-ordinary display or storage on this application. Chapter 2173, landscape and lighting standards. This property lacks interior landscape tree requirements. Where tree islands originally existed in the front north, currently there are none. One island strip remains in the rear southwest corner. Per 21-73044, screening dumpsters. All outside dumpsters or other garbage receptacles on the site shall be screened by an opaque fence or wall. Many of the walls that originally existed for screening the dumpsters have been removed. There were originally, I will show you a site plan, you actually have one in front of you from 1977. We'll get to that. Titles 5, 18, 21, and 24. Sidewalk, trail, curb and gutter, and subdivision of land. The owner applicant agrees to bind lots 1 and 2 and 8 together with a development lot agreement, so we will be doing this if approved. Staff was originally unable to locate the original set of plans for the Watertown Mall facility, showing the originally approved parking, loading, sidewalks, trees for the interior and the frontage, islands, lighting, etc. We did find a site plan. This is what's in front of you there. It's not easy to read. It copies off very blurry. It's circa 1977. However, the landscape plan schedule, which would have showed some of these things like trees and islands, could not be found. This board must determine If satisfactory provision and arrangement has been made concerning these chapters and titles and sections discussed, this parcel lacks minimum interior, boulevard infrastructure, trees, sidewalk, trail requirements. If generally endorsed, the board may consider conditions of approval such as fulfillment of any or all lacking boulevard infrastructure interior requirements, waiver of right to protest, development lot agreement, limiting the scope of approval to, for instance, the building only, and or any other conditions this board deems necessary.
Thank you, Joe. I'll go ahead and open the public hearing if there's anybody here to speak on behalf or against.
My name's Kevin Lidner, work at the Watertown Mall as a facility manager.
Hello, Mr. Lindner. Did you have a statement or just here to answer questions?
Yeah, if there's any questions.
So we do have some facilities in the mall today that sell alcohol, Jill. Those businesses would have approached us specifically for their use, the operators of those individual businesses.
Actually, this is much like the Shriver Square that we did in recent times here. Right now, Senior Max is, I think, the only operation that holds liquor license. Mr. T's used to be in there. The thing is we could not, staff couldn't find any proof of having gone through this board to first get this use approved on the site. We couldn't find any proof of that.
So is the purpose to apply potential liquor and or beer licenses to any storefront within the mall, or is it primarily to allow for the Thursday night live things, or what's driving this?
It's primary for the Thursday Night Live.
That's what's driving it. However, approval, unless you actually set a parameter of conditions specifically otherwise, this would be, again, like Shriver Square in that.
Some of us aren't aware of the Shriver
Yeah,
Square.
in that, as long as a liquor license was held and used actively on the site, the whole mall would not have to come back to this board to seek a blessing for the facility. They would simply go on to the city council for the liquor license approval.
And it would remain a two-phase deal, so we would say that the land is okay to be used for this kind of use, but they would still be required to go to the city council to get an actual liquor license for whatever proprietor or event. Is that true?
They would not have to come, if you approved it, the whole parcel, whether it was parking lot or just the building or whatever, if you approve that, then nothing that goes within those parameters would come back to you. It would simply go to the city council for the liquor license.
Unless it was discontinued for more than a year in the entire facility.
Yeah, unless there was 0 alcohol licenses operating in there for a year continuously, it would never have to come back here.
So if Senior Max's was to close up, they sat vacant for a year, and then they needed to come back to see this board prior to seeing the city council.
Correct.
Only if there isn't another active liquor license. Any liquor license would keep it going for the whole facility. Yeah.
Right.
Jill, remind me now, we're saying liquor license, but is that beer, wine as well, or is that a different?
That is any liquor license that is eligible to the entity that comes to the city council.
But each individual business would have to solicit for a license,
With the city.
correct, with the city council.
When you did the Shriver Square, did you do the parking lot as well as the structure?
Yes, we did.
Reasoning why?
Well, it was basically in case somebody wants to do some kind of a yard party or anything else, or a band or an event, or even go out on the sidewalk with tables and chairs or something like that. It's not making them come back to you every time, because basically we're just saying the ground meets the requirements for a liquor license, and that's as far as we're taking it. And then also let the file show that Liam has joined us.
So the letter from the mall manager says, the request is any liquor sold in the mall to patrons with any liquor to be sold in the mall to be allowed to wander the halls.
Yes.
What,
It'd be just basically, and then we put out a deal to all the stores. If they do not want somebody in there with a beer or whatever, then they will put signage up, please do not enter our store with alcohol beverage or something. It's basically just for Thursday Night Live, for your 3 hours of playing this band, that they will be selling the beer out of the old pretzel maker area in center court where the people sit and listen to the band.
but the application doesn't specifically say that. The
Well-
application is for all the grounds, all the parking lot, and you're requesting to wander the halls apparently without any restrictions. I mean, is that basically what approving this as it stands right now would allow? That's what would happen?
It would only allow, this is a kind of a unique situation, of course. We only have one mall in Watertown, but, or indoor mall. So the footprint that gets approved, on the liquor license end for the interior, so in this case, Chamber's gonna come forward, apply for a malt beverage license that would encompass whatever footprint they've decided on. It's gonna include the interior of the mall, as well as any businesses that also are okay with people walking into those businesses with alcohol. So anybody, that purchases alcohol from the Chamber in this case, in that footprint, can wander around in that footprint with alcohol just as if it was a bar. Because basically this is a private structure, even though it seems kind of public, but it's a private structure. People that purchase alcohol from the licensee in that footprint can't walk into any business that said, we don't want you to be a part of that footprint, and also can't walk into any business where there's another license that's active. So people from Senior Max's can't walk into the mall, and people from the mall can't walk into Senior Max's with alcohol.
What precludes people walking out of Senior Max's with their beer in their hand today?
Their on-sale license is limited to their footprint. So if I buy a beer at Senior Max's, it's gotta be consumed on the premises, because it's an on-sale license.
And she made for sure that happened on the last Thursday Night Live last month, that nobody could leave her store with any beverage. They had to sit right in there and drink it. She had told them that. Because last time we never had no alcohol there for the Thursday Night Live.
Now, I thought Jill just told us that they couldn't find the Senior Maxes have that.
So there's two different things here. Senior Max's never came to this board to get blessed, but Senior Max's does have a license, and on that license indicates where their license footprint is. So their license footprint is their
suite
unit-
number.
their
Their
suite
suite
in the
number.
mall. Right,
That-
their suite in
That's
the
the
mall.
only area that they can serve out. She's been
Right.
in contact with the city attorney and stuff. I don't know if it was you. And that's what she was told, that it's only her suite number that she can serve it in. 'Cause she wanted to know if she could come out in the hallway and serve like downtown businesses, like they come out, but she can't.
So how is this different than when we approach the Cooking on Compesca beer license for an event license? If it's solely intended for the purposes of an event such as Thursday Night Live, how is that different than how we treat?
Oh, what they're doing here is they're actually getting a regular license. So a Thursday Night Live, or Cooking on Compesca is a special event license.
Could
Which-
they get a special event license for all the Thursdays between now and March?
You only have 4 a year,
Oh, okay.
so that's the reason they're doing this.
Okay, thank you.
How does that contrast? So you said this is a private facility essentially inside. How does that contrast with what we've done in the downtown area with Thursday Night Live and the controls we've put in place as far as where you can consume and?
Yeah, so downtown we do what's called the sidewalk cafe permit. So that's a little bit different because they're actually consuming in a public space. And we have the sidewalk cafe permit that allows them to basically extend their footprint into the public space. So the way we did this past year was, the chamber was kind of the organizer, but it was Tommy's Lanes' license that was used to sell alcohol adjacent to their licensed premise. You know, previously it was the Goss that had the sidewalk cafe permit, so it's a little different because it's a public space, the mall's a private
So
facility.
let's take that public space a step further. What if the city was to acquire property and build a hockey facility out there in a public space? Then if on a Thursday night or no one necessarily be a Thursday, it could be any day during the week, a person could be buying a beer, and then would they be able to access the public space there during a hockey tournament with beer?
Let me make sure I know understand your hypothetical. So
hypothetical is that
if
you're
somebody
buying
went
public
into J.C.
space.
Penney and
Yeah.
they put the hockey arena there,
Yeah, and that becomes public property through lease or purchase.
well, in that case, we would probably want to take the action to limit this action. So we'd probably want to come back to this board and
Would you be able to take that away from them, or unless I suppose on terms of the sale of the lease, you probably could.
But they could, just like anybody else, just post a sign at their door, and there's no alcoholic beverages allowed.
But someone has to police that. A sign at the door doesn't mean that's what's going to happen.
Well, and to me, the flip side of that is what if we get a semi-pro team and they want to sell alcohol at that event? I mean,
I'm not
so
saying,
No, just a question. We understand
But
it.
still, everything you're doing is just busting the dirt. City council still has to give the authority for it to be done.
If the board wanted to put some limitation on it, so Thursday Night Live doesn't become Tuesday Morning Live and, Saturday Afternoon Live, why can't we do the Compesca wing fling permit process?
because
So
they're
that we
limited
just-
to 4 times a year. That's right, 4 times a year.
correct.
Right, which wouldn't that even make it more in line with the event permit than
Well, these guys want to have one every month, and so that's the reason they're coming forward for a regular license versus the special.
but I think what Mark's saying is, can't we change the stipulations of that special event to be whatever, 12.
That's certainly an option. The ordinance could be changed, yeah.
But if you're saying the dirt's good on any given night, why isn't it good on any other given night?
I'm not there yet. I'm saying it could very well be. I'm just trying to flesh the whole thing out.
Well, because, this is just leaving it to change without them having to come back and see you guys every time something happens.
And I
Because if
appreciate- I
Thursday Night
appre- I
Live all of a
appreciate
sudden
that.
turns up or it doesn't go uptown in the summertime, they decide they want to do it out there in the back lot, then they're gonna come back to you guys again. So again, you're already allowing a couple of liquor licenses out there currently.
And I would just want to add one more thing on your hypothetical. If I understand correctly, the license will not include the current vacant space. And so according to that hypothetical, if this license comes forward and is approved, it actually won't include Herberger's or J.C. Penney. So if J.C. Penney was torn down and a hockey arena was put there, even though the mall itself, the dirt is blessed, as Ken's saying, there's still no licensed ability for a beer to go in there, essentially, from somewhere else.
So just like the current owners of the liquor licenses, so Senior Max's, for instance, they have to define where that liquor license applies to.
Right.
So they define the physical area there at that time.
Right.
Well, like you said, Tuesday morning or Saturday morning, serving beer, the mall's not gonna allow that. We're still a mall with stores where we get people in there. It's gonna be just Thursday night, we're not gonna allow people to come in there and say a Saturday morning and start serving beer. It's not gonna happen.
This is just a malt liquor, so beer and wine only, or is it?
For the Thursday Night Live, it's just a malt liquor. But keep in mind, if you do, what's that? Malt beverage, excuse me. But keep in mind that if you do, if you do approve this, What, it could be on sale, it could be off sale, it could be hard liquor, whatever, whoever goes to the city council to get a license for within your blessed space, because that's what you're doing, is you're just giving the okay to the space to apply for the licenses.
Mr. Attorney, presently, all of the on-sale liquor licenses are held right now at permanent locations. Are there any not being used?
On sale liquor.
On-sale liquor, yeah, or off-sale? I mean, like a packaged liquor off-sale, are they all being utilized in the city?
They're all owned,
Yeah.
certainly. There was an inactive one that I know Harry's is using now. I'm not sure if there are other inactive licenses currently.
And under state law, restaurants can get liquor licenses if a certain percentage of their revenues are based on food, and so.
Correct. Nobody in Watertown has done that yet.
Right.
But
Okay, so I think I'm okay on the main request. Let's go back to your staff concerns regarding trails and parking and screening and islands of trees. So the question is, is this the appropriate place to attach those conditions again? Where's the nexus to be? I understand that they're non-conforming and it's not complying with the ordinance or even with the intent of the original permit, but is this the time that you would be going about and requesting all those things to be brought into compliance so we can have 8 beer events over the course of the winter or something?
Well, I think the garbage screening would be nice. I don't know about the interior trees, that's probably here nor there, but.
This is just always with every conditional use application, the door opens to your review, and you can bring those things into compliance. It's not that we're not advocating either way.
Where are the garbages now, Joe?
There's one right there by Senior Max's up there where the front little notch is right there. There used to be a wall across there, and a semi hit it and knocked it down. There used to be dumpsters there. They're gone. So Senior Max's has theirs in a wall right there.
Joe, there's
and
that
then
map on the
Angel's
agenda.
Attic. Angel's Attic has them right there next to Penny's in that cement wall. And then Planet Fitness will have theirs in there by that garage door. That's on the front of the mall. That's in a cement wall deals. And then there's dumpsters out back by the old Kmart area, and then out back by where Mr. T's used to be. There's 2 dumpsters.
Those 2 are not screened in the back?
Well, they're up against the walls in an area. They don't have cement walls around them.
But the ones up front do.
The ones up front do.
So here is the dumpsters locations where they have them, and as you would see on the blueprint in front of you, there used to be, he was saying, a screened wall here and screened wall somewhere over here. There was a screened wall around the back dumpsters here. So originally they did have the screen.
That screen wall's still on the back, that there's a cooling tower back there. And then when Mr. T's got built back there, the dumpsters got moved out off to the side. They could be put back there again, because Mr. T's ain't using it anymore anyway. They're not there. And they'd be behind the wall.
I guess my opinion on the matter would be, on a minimal change of use or an addition change to use, I don't think that it would be appropriate to attach non-compliant conditions to the ordinance. If we were looking at adding on demolition, doing some major construction where there's going to be some different footprints of the building, that would maybe be the more appropriate issue. We know that at the same time, we're trying to do things to make the mall more attractive, getting people into the mall. So whatever we can do to help that, just from an economic development perspective, we should be looking at. So once you close the public hearing, I'm prepared to make a motion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Case. Is there anybody else from the public that would like to approach and make a statement? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion.
Go ahead.
I move to approve the request as submitted, applying the bar tavern designation to the property as described, subject to a development lot agreement tying those lots together, and not having to address issues such as parking, screening, garbage screening, any of those things.
Thank you, Mr. Kays. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Colhane. Any additional discussion? Take a roll call vote. Jill?
Colhane,
Yes.
Hanson,
No.
Ford,
No.
Stein,
Yes.
Dolly,
Yes.
Kays.
Yes.
Dargis Johnson.
Yes.
Passes.
Motion passes. Item 3 on the agenda is the open public comment submittal period. If anybody's here to speak on behalf of another item for the board. Seeing none, I'll move on to old business.
None.
I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Colhane, second by Stein.
Yeah, whatever.
All in favor? Opposed? We're adjourned. All right. Let's go ahead and get this started. So I'd like to call to order the Thursday, December 6th, 2018 City Plan Commission meeting. I get a roll call?
Hanson. Ford.
Here.
Stein.
Here.
Dolly.
Here.
Kays. Dargis Johnson.
Here.
Colhane.
Present and accounted for.
And Oletsky and Olson, or just Olson, is absent.
First item on the agenda is an invitation for public comment participant submittal. So if you'd like to speak later, we'll have time for that. Go ahead and sign your name up. Item 2 on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Colhane, second by Dargis Johnson. All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. Third item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the November 8th, 2018 meeting. Have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Colhane. Second by Dargis Johnson. All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. Item 4 is the acceptance of the 2019 Board of Adjustment Plan Commission meeting schedule.
So that schedule is what was included in your packets. The dates are standard, same first and third week of every month, as long as there's not a holiday, in line with city council meetings on the same weeks. So city council on Mondays, plan commission, board of adjustment on Thursdays.
The only thing that I noticed when I was going through this and putting it in my calendar was that there's a pretty big jump between the June 20th and July 18th. Is that typical due to the holiday there?
Yeah, and actually, we usually don't even have submittals during that time.
Yeah.
So that meeting is usually not necessary.
Good.
Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Yeah.
I'd also like to point out the submittal deadlines are in accordance with the subdivision regulations, which require the applicants to provide us submittals at least 20 days prior to the planning commission meeting that they will be taken to. So those dates still coordinate with that requirement from the subdivision regulations.
Good. Thank you. Any additional comments? We take a vote on that?
Yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Good deal.
All right. Item 5 is update to the comprehensive land use plan meeting. I assume that's why you're here. Luke, gonna take us through some stuff?
That's right, we'll go on a whirlwind here in just a moment.
Perfect.
You got it.
I had to slide way over here so I could get into the speaking chair. If you're ready for me to go, I will. I appreciate the hesitancy with which you turned it over to me the first time. We are back to, actually I'm going to open this thing too here. We're back to where we were just a few short months ago in reviewing the land use plan. And we've gone through several of the, I'm sorry, I'm going to just catch myself up here. Right here. We've gone through a handful of meetings already. You have endured 3 to 4 hours, probably closer to 5 hours, discussion on land use plan. You've, at this point, read through a couple hundred pages of land use plan and have your notes written down, and we've gone through this step here where we're at to catch you up, and I'm just kind of trying to slowly get your brain back into gear and get mine into gear too with where we are. We've been talking about the future land use section, which is, frankly, the big tamale, the whole reason we're here with the land use plan. As I said in the previous meeting, it was split into 2 sections, of course, just talking topically. We went through that a little bit, and that's generally how we've done things in the past, is just the topical, but we address things spatially as well. Development areas in town. We talked about development areas in town earlier at previous meetings about information there, and then split them into redevelopment areas that correspond similarly to those, and they talk about residential issues as well as commercial issues. There are not industrial issues discussed all that heavily within this section because we addressed a little more spatial review in the categorical description, I guess. So I'm going to pick up where we left off, and unless someone remembers differently, I have marked down that we left off at the Jefferson redevelopment area is where we had. We spoke about Lake Compesca redevelopment area and McKinley redevelopment area, kind of working our way west to east, and we'll kind of double all the way back around, circle the community in doing that. So as we said the last time, the way it's broken up is just having recommendations, and in the end, all I have on these slides here are just the recommendations for this area, more specific recommendations into there. And so for the Jefferson redevelopment area, you can see the areas in the colored area there. That's the area we're talking about. We have just from a general standpoint, the recommendation for civic and campus zoning for certain areas there, including but not limited to, you could include Highland Park, the Wellness Center, and middle school, Great Plains Lutheran Church and School, or Great Plains Lutheran School,
in addition to other parks and quasi-public facilities, if you find others that go on there. And the reason, again, civic campus zoning, as we'll talk about in a little bit, if you want to go into that, I think we're all well aware of the fact that there are things that go on some of these properties that frankly we feel like we're chasing our tail. At least I remember when I worked here, worked directly for the city, it seemed like we were constantly chasing and coming back for permits at the hospital and at other places, and that would be a way to handle those as with a campus type of a zoning district. We've got uses going on at some of these places that frankly would generally not be supported in the underlying district if we didn't have that. So that's one of them. The other, reserve areas for future expansion with public parks. So as you expand, grow into these areas, to plan for where you're going to have parks into these areas. The other part, the third bullet point on here is to identify and come up with ways. One way would be to have an overlay district. Other would be some specific standards for decreasing minimum lot area requirements, perhaps even setback requirements in an area. You can see the areas in yellow primarily there, especially in this middle stretch here. In this middle stretch here, kind of following Highland Boulevard and to the west, kind of in this heart area here of that. And it's more from the standpoint that this is, I'd call it medium density single family residences. It's not high density. It's not like you'll see in a little bit here, but it's still single family density, but there are some lots that are down in the 7,500 square foot area in that area, which they can be worked with far easier than some of the others, but it still poses some problems with your zoning ordinance. I'll move into the other portion of the Jefferson redevelopment area, which is one commercial stretch that we have in there as well. As you recall, we lumped some of those commercial redevelopment corridors and specifically noted some of the things going on the ground, and then some recommendations into there. And obviously, if you don't like them, go ahead and let me know. If you think we missed some things, go ahead too. The Jefferson redevelopment area is, frankly, right now has evolved into the most restricted aesthetic standards of any commercial redevelopment area we have. I don't know if that's on purpose or not, but it really has. A lot of our commercial activities there are using siding, brick or stucco, or we're not seeing steel buildings there. We're seeing pole signs, and frankly, we're not seeing haven't in the past seen a whole lot of temporary signs or other signs along that stretch as well. So it's got a higher aesthetic standards in those areas. The recommendation here is that this would be an opportunity to create and implement an office zoning district, which would be modeled after the existing regulations in the specific use office buildings. I know before you've heard me speak at meetings in which you have that specific use office building use, in which under that use you have 11 different uses, I believe, and setback standards as well as sign requirements as well. By another name, that's a zoning district already. So the bottom line is it's all but created. The difference there is that the office zoning district would be modeled more after something you'd see in Sioux Falls or other communities that have the ability to have apartments above that as well in those sorts of situations.
Would you see that more as an overlay district in that area?
I think you could do that as an actual primary use district in those cases, especially as you look at somewhat of the stretch that is in the lighter orange. Some of that.
And you'd be looking at most of those uses, if we get to that discussion, to be more permitted versus conditional and those types of things.
More than likely, yes. I mean, a lot of it is once it's zoned to that, but you really have the door tight on. It's going to be more of a form based, and that it's going to be form based, and you're handling where you're handling your parking and that sort of thing. And I've got pictures later on of examples of it, but that just kind of is the example, those couple of them. And again, adopting a land use plan doesn't guarantee we're going to do it, but at least it's got the door open to do so, because frankly, the specific use office buildings, though is listed as a use, even that without having some background in our land use plan, we could at the minimum use the support in the land use plan even for that use as it sits. So. Is there anything else within that Jefferson School District area? I mean, you saw what it was. Is there anything as you read the document, or if you're curious as to whether or not we address? Otherwise, I'll move on.
Luke, I can't remember specifically within the general commercial guidelines within the ordinance. We still don't recommend leapfrog commercial development as far north on Old 81 to the North 26th Street corner.
No, that's correct. It's still recommended as being nodal as you go toward those. So basically, clustered is where it is, clustered towards higher intensity intersections. So it would not encourage strip development as you head to the north there.
And reduce access points going north.
Exactly. Yep. That is within the Jefferson redevelopment, the North 81 standards that are in there.
And currently, too, I'll add that it is zoned the C2 community commercial, which those uses are more inclined for a higher aesthetic value.
Exactly.
Where, I mean, you're getting your financial institutions, we have dentists up there.
In the coffee shop.
The coffee shop, that'll be nice. So that's why, too, that you're not getting the steel siding and everything. But that would be something to look for in the future of adding another zoning district that would be more specific.
Holding to siding requirements and aesthetic.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. And generally, that is what you see with an office-style district where you have accountants and law firms and chiropractors and that. So.
And then the proximity that we have to the the R1 residential districts in the area.
It's basically Western Avenue south of 220 I-20
Yeah.
229.
Yeah. Yes. The next area is significantly different. The next redevelopment area that was discussed is what's the Millette redevelopment area, which corresponds with the Millette School District. We're well aware of this, and the Roosevelt School District will encompass some of the older parts of our town. And with that, we've got smaller lots. We also have some long-established uses, and that's where the hospital comes in here. And so one of those points is to allow for growth of the healthcare campus of Prairie Lakes by allowing a mix of uses in what would be a campus sort of a district. They'd be better managed in a district of that sort, in which we would just essentially name the sorts of uses that may go on and establish how far off the property lines they'd need to be in. As long as they remain in those parameters, it continues rather than have to revisit a rezoning or an expansion or something along those lines. Next point that's on there is to create a method of tracking, reviewing, and performing safety inspections on single-family residences that are converted to multifamily structures as a by right use, subject to certain safety and parking. This is something that an option on that is to have a occupancy permit, but I know that is not exactly something that is an easy transition, and I'm not going to say that that's what this is doing, but it does beg the question, because we do, as we find our land use survey, this is an area where we have a lot of converted single-family dwellings turned into multifamily here and then to the south of it.
So how is that handled right now in the city, where we have single-family homes that we allow duplexes as a conditional use or a permitted use in the R2 or R2A zones? Can anybody just go start doing it, or do they have to come and talk to you, Kenny?
No, if it's in the R2 zoning district, rather than just coming and getting us a permit to do it, they don't have to get a conditional use or anything like that. They just need a construction permit if they're gonna modify it or add a room or add a dwelling to it.
So when these single-family structures with existing limited off-street parking convert themselves to twin homes or duplexes or triplexes, how do we address parking as the city?
Well, if we're aware of it at the time they do it, we request that they add it. They don't always come to us, though. And if we find the fact after the fact, letters have been going out and told people that they can't do what they're doing in their place, so.
Okay, I was just
If
curious.
they've added a triplex into a two-family dwelling unit, say, hey, you gotta come back and go to the board for this or something.
Again, what's the history of the board when those requests come before? I mean, are they usually granted, or are they
they've been so few and far between, but, you know, fourplexes in the R2 zoning district, we've maybe had 4 or 5 over the last 5 years probably, so. And typically if the yard will satisfy it and the parking will satisfy it, it's always been a yes anyway, so.
As you look at, you recall just a handful of months ago as we were looking through the existing land use maps, that's where I had, you may recall I had the blue and purple or blue and pink maps that were up there. One color would indicate owner occupied versus the other one leased. And this is where we were seeing more of the leased in some of those cases, and a lot of that does stem from some rental, but there are also some that were originally set up as well as rental units. You know, there's some of that along Third, for example, that were originally set up. So bottom line is, you have rezoned a lot of this to R2A anyway, which does allow for more than one dwelling or more than one dwelling unit on the site. And so this one opens the door to do that, but also just kind of lays the groundwork that if you come up with a way to go ahead and do that, and basically to find innovative ways to do that. The other part, provide opportunity through performance standards or by creating an overlay district to allow decreased lot area with their setback requirements throughout the entire development area. In looking at it, you can see there are a lot of red, which means those lots are less than 6,000 square feet. Even into that, even with your R2A in cases, I mean, you're aware you issue variances even in those cases sometimes. At this point, I don't have the answer, the magic bullet in these cases. That's one of those where I always recommend, if you find yourself issuing a lot of variances in a single area, you continue your review whether or not you can work with something or figure out what the rule is or how often you are variancing in this area or that. But you are far less with the R2A, I will say that, now that you've got that into place. The main thing that you'll notice on those is that a lot of these are set up, they used to be on larger lots, and frankly, one of the bigger problems that we face is that the lots that are setbacks, we require more. The corner lots, those tend to be the ones that have been split.
Yeah, and we've discussed that as a board too, and I know we have some pending changes to the ordinance that we'll be discussing in more detail at an upcoming meeting, so yeah, it's definitely an area of future consideration.
And further analysis can also be done as we get more and more data with regards to having lines drawn, lines on structures themselves to be able to follow where they're at and be able to show where they're at, as opposed to just kind of using an aerial and reviewing it that way. As we get more and more data in the future, we may be able to do a better job of saying definitively, if we do this, we're going to affect blank % of people, as opposed to just doing a random sampling. So, the other couple of points, reserving areas for public parking near clusters or multiple family units in areas originally designed for single family residences. This was something that was brought up in some previous meetings, actually a handful of years ago, whereas we get these and we do convert them. We have a lot of buildings stacked on top of each other, but as Commissioner Kays mentioned, not original parking situations. So to have opportunities and seize those opportunities if they do come up to provide or require off-street parking in areas where we've got multiple multifamily uses. Allow for the continuation of certain industrial uses subject to certain performance standards, but allow setback requirements which take into account the irregular size and shape of the area through specific requirements. Primarily what we're talking about is the area that's on the fringe of the downtown in those cases. And then lastly, identify those sites that are currently or may be classified as future brownfields, and of course discourage incompatible development over or near them. As we see brownfields come up, we know we've got downtown areas, we have had some in the past, and we review and make sure that we discourage incompatible uses in those areas.
Luke, would it be appropriate to identify a specific call out for infrastructure improvement, specifically like Lions Park and tying Lions Park into our trail system in this particular time? I know on at least an earlier draft, I think the draft I have in front of me, it looked different than what you showed up here, but in the Jefferson redevelopment area, you make some specific mentions about Highland Park and some of those areas.
Yes, the with regards to the Jefferson redevelopment area, that does reference the Highland Park as being a place where more than just playing on jungle gyms goes on. And in this case, Lions Park, I think, would make sense in that case too.
The only thought I had reading it was that if we could just make sure, maybe this isn't the appropriate place to insert it, but where we talk about trying to tie it into the trail system, try to make it more pedestrian accessible, because I think it would be better utilized if that Third Avenue bridge had some sort of pedestrian capability.
And the other question that I've also thought about this area, because I work across the street at First Avenue North between there, and you see it all the time, is still industrial zoning the appropriate zoning for that area from, let's just say, Maple to 3rd Street on the north side of First Avenue, based upon the different types of uses. The current reconversions have been more to commercial office type things that are going on. We all know it was industrial zone because of the railroad and everything at the time, and with the Metz Baking being closed, I mean, there is some warehousing that's still going on in some of that area. Is that really still the most appropriate long-range zone for redevelopment purposes?
The board has taken some action to rezone some of those lots in recent years to commercial zoning. It does fit with, the uses that we're seeing down there. I think it would be appropriate that we continue that kind of development in the area.
Right.
Is there any industrial use that goes on in that area you described from Maple West, right?
Well, the corner of, you've got, you still have the shop on the corner of 3rd Avenue and 1st Street with some outdoor storage of trucks and truck trailers and.
Bernie's?
No, who is that? They're just right across the street from us, next to the fire department.
Oh, Terco.
No, Terco's on the south side, but on the north side,
There's not a building there, it's a lot, right?
next to there's the fire department, there's the parking lot, and then it's from Kransberg.
Hader
Hader.
owns that property.
Yeah, Hader.
Jerome
to the north
owns
there.
that property, and it's kind of, it's open and it's vacant. You still have the old potato warehouse on the corner of 3rd and 3rd. But then there's a lot of open space yet in the back. Then you get closer to Broadway, and you've got Tacker's storage and some of those things back there behind Dempsey's. I'm just saying, industrial zone with our industrial zoning requirements, proximity to residential development on the north side of this zoned area. At some point in time, industrial zoning is probably not the most appropriate long-range use for that land.
Yes.
I just want to ask a question of Luke.
Sure.
If you use the word brownfield, would you please explain what you mean by that, just to remind everybody?
Sure. A brownfield is an area that is classified as having polluted soils, is probably the simplest way to say it, due to some past practice or past. And it wouldn't even have to be a catastrophe, but just the way property was managed at the time. And we do have cases where we've got places that, whether they be gas tanks, former gas tanks, or other forms of storage that did lead to that. And we're not alone in the country for having places like that, but we do have places like that, and where they're most apt to have happened along the old railroad, where we had initial development for towns. So that's where we're most susceptible to having this, and we need to review and be cognizant of the fact that those may be out there, and every now and then we become aware of new ones.
And we do have areas like this, so what are you suggesting?
Basically to verify, review whether or not the uses would be compatible over the top of them, some cases, and review that through whether they be environmental regulations that exist currently or recommendations through there. I'm not recommending an overlay district in that respect, although more that's going to be something that is to be reviewed at the time of permitting to review those. However, if you're so inclined, you could identify those and indicate that that's not that we do need to have that sort of an overlay district of some sort.
I don't know if it needs to be an overlay district, but should we be not relying on institutional knowledge to remember those things?
Well, it could very well
denote it somewhere.
It could
in
be
the
very
comp
well
plan?
recommended that maybe phase 1 environmentals need to be done. on some of those properties that are proposed or maybe considered a brownfield, suspect, prior to redevelopment.
Well, we have active observation wells
Yes.
in places, and I think, does the general public know that? Does a new planner that moves here from elsewhere know that? How do we pass that information on? Because someone using our comp plan as a tool to decide from elsewhere that they're looking through the comp plan for a suitable place to develop. How do we incorporate that so that we don't find out after they've spent thousands and thousands of dollars designing or preliminary stuff?
Well, this gets back to my point where if you're talking about long-range 30, 40, 50-year redevelopment of everything on the north side of First Avenue, at least between that Broadway and Third, any redevelopment that goes on there probably should be some environmental testing done on the soils. We had to do that with Betts Baking a few years ago, with utilities had to go in and do, I remember that was something that happened. It just makes good sense so that, again, somebody doesn't go out and stick $400,000 into a building.
Right.
And next thing you know, there's fumes and things that are leaking up and making people sick.
I can remember sitting in City Hall and the stench from the hole dug blocks away was overwhelming because the soil was contaminated. Whether that's still there or, is that, do we owe that, somebody that kind of information?
Yeah, I think it'd be certainly a good idea to identify that and record it in some capacity. I don't know what the most appropriate methodology is, but
I don't know either, but I'm really hoping that the comp plan is a useful tool and a helpful tool for development, and just to, maybe it's not going to be a problem for someone knowing that, but for another use it might be.
Heath, in your experiences with brownfields, I mean, you being out in Wyoming and with oil and gas and coal and things, I'm sure you ran across how maybe they approach redevelopment in those areas?
Yeah, and for the most part, my experiences both out there and back here in South Dakota prior to that, it was more driven on a proprietary basis, on a development basis, where, we use a cliche of buyer beware, but it was kind of set out there or not otherwise strictly identified on the public agency side of things. That's not to say if we have valuable information at our fingertips that we couldn't share that and try to disseminate that information. I'm not sure I've ever seen that incorporated into a comp use plan, otherwise in general terminology that indicates that, hey, this is an area of likelihood to come across brownfield type of issues, but then you don't want to rubber stamp that across all parcels either and scare people away from the area. So, yeah, it's kind of a fine line. In my mind, when the developers or potential buyers come in and start the preliminary discussions with Ken and I and the engineering and building offices, again, any information we have at our fingertips, we would obviously want to share with them of any known smoking guns that are out there, which I feel would be appropriate, of either mitigated sites or sites that we know that need mitigation on them.
I kind of echo to a degree. I think where Heath was going with some of that is that right now, and I may have missed it, but I'm not aware of a place where we had it before, where we even had the goal of identifying brownfields and trying to discourage compatible uses over them. That was the first step on it. I think having a punch list or naming properties probably wouldn't be appropriate in a document. And I'm a little bit hesitant to even go ahead and map them within the land use plan.
Maybe I would recommend, Luke, just reaching out to Sioux Falls with all the redevelopment
Sure.
that they're doing with the rail yard and seeing how their comp plan approached that redevelopment, and maybe we could maybe just steal something from them.
maybe if it's even just more general in terms, I mean, you mentioned adjacent to the old railroad, and if we could use some kind of generic language like that. as opposed to the larger area of the Millette redevelopment area.
Sure.
I'm sure there is some sample language that somebody else has used, and again, it doesn't have to be a strong policy statement, it can be just a guiding principle.
And that's where I'm at. I want to keep it, this does need to be something that we can use and refer to, but in the same breath, it's not a land use manual too, so we're gonna tiptoe that line. I will though. I'll take a look at a couple of towns I can think of, one northwest of us and one southeast of us, I think that would probably have gone through similar in the not too distant past. Next slide is a duplicate slide, so I'll skip over it. That was with the Central 81 that I just, actually, no, let me take that back. Yeah, that was the North 81. Yes, correct. So, moving along to the Lincoln redevelopment area, a couple of these actually got crossed off as we talked through some things, and frankly, the town's already completed them, or they're already in the process of changing to a degree. First part, though, the very first one there listed, again, referencing the campus district with regards to Mount Marty and Lake Area Technical Institute campuses. We know, we're well aware of, there are a lot of things that go on within the campus that, frankly, just the definition of school may not be the best way to go about doing things. So that would be a good way to handle that. Providing an opportunity through performance standards, creating an overlay district, some manner that handles the area. And when I'd initially gone through this, I had envisioned we'd probably wind up having what would amount to a Grant school overlay district and a Garfield school overlay district, essentially. And actually, as going through, it didn't bear out that way. Some of the old school districts turned out to be meeting our setbacks, meeting our size requirements, and then there's parts that didn't. And one of those areas is right here, and that is Arrow Avenue. That's north of Arrow Avenue up to 3rd. And then you can kind of even make that argument as you head east all the way over to, I believe that is 9th, if I'm not mistaken. The high school's here, and all the way over to there. You could make the argument that up to 7th and then back down to Arrow Avenue, there's some lot area issues and setback issues that you run into. If you haven't run into them, you could run into them in the not too distant future with regards to the size of those. Not advocating anything special at this point, but just to identify that here's an area that you may run into issues, and if you need to get innovative, that's an area that might make some sense to do so. The next one on that list, as I said, the Stromstad Industrial Park, I know that that's under a redevelopment plan, honestly, at this time, as that's been purchased and kind of a review on what sorts of uses to go into there. So that one, I'm actually suggesting that not even be in the plan anymore, since that's likely to be changed. Next part, a mix of land uses compatible with those uses south of Willow Creek should be encouraged. North of Willow Creek, I think that only makes sense. That north of Willow Creek, you're going to be encouraging land uses that'll be compatible on the south side, as you've got an overlay district there. And then the other part, references to screening the industrial park that was initially planned east of, in that eastern side of, along 31st Street. So those two are 31st Avenue. So working that, there's less of a need for screening that, as the use, it sounds like, at least preliminarily, the intent is that land uses will gradually increase in intensity, as opposed to go from single-family residential to heavy industrial, as was initially planned. Within this redevelopment area would be included a couple of areas that are probably the fastest growing. Some of the areas we're seeing in commercial development, and that's this area along Willow Creek, which we call the Willow Creek redevelopment or development area. This really just lays the groundwork mostly for your overlay district that you already have, is the long and short of it. These points here, I'm really not even going to read them to you because that's basically what they are. They lay the groundwork for that, allow for commercial, retail, office, some medium, high density, residential, and a mix of commercial and industrial uses. But for the most part, it's going to be more commercial with aesthetic standards to be applied. You can see at the bottom, landscaping plans for properties or strips of property adjacent to certain streets should be coordinated to limit occurrence of checkerboard landscaping.
Luke, is this the time, or it'll be later, that we will talk about transportation networks in this area? Is that at a later discussion?
I would suggest discussing it now if you'd like to.
So, how are we looking at the development of 31st and connection into Willow Creek, and as the gravel pits sunset in the next 30 to 50 years? Any recommendations?
Currently at this time, going off of what we know as current situations, right now we know that DOT, to put it mildly, is not keen on the intersection of 31st and Highway 212. That's been said that will go away at some point. That road will work its way into 31st, will work its way at this point back to the west into Willow Creek Drive as it curves back and come into a square radius at this point, at least is how it's planned. That's going to need to be a large road because that's going to skirt the western edge of your town. The other part that would come in, and that does come with the next slide a little bit, but I think it's relevant here as well, is the spacing warrants, at least at one point, at 33rd, you'd at least be able to continue and keep that crossover there. At the last conversation. So you would have the opportunity to cross over and have a street that goes straight north where 33rd is. Good news to that is that you'd have the ability to breach that and be able to go straight north and work your way over to where 31st was before there as well. The bad news to that is that it is owned, that whole property is straddled by one property owner. So that would go right down the middle and split that property owner's property. So from a development standpoint, it's got to go through that. And then as you go through toward the north, you obviously, 31st would be your collector, your major collector, but that also is going to have to ride along the topography as it goes north.
Can you pull up the GIS and maybe show that on the map for people that aren't familiar with
Absolutely.
the streets?
31st is that gravel on the east side of Willow Creek?
Correct.
Yeah, it takes you up to the pits.
Luke, could you explain what you mean? Because on the other graphic, you said prepare for the closure of 31st Street, but now you're talking about actually making it bigger and curving back in and...
No.
Closure of the intersection with 212 and 31st Street.
Closure of 31st, I was referencing 33rd would be the one that you could come up from. 31st would be the preparation. We need to be prepared for the fact that this intersection here, this is 31st, right, east of the stoplight at Willow Creek Drive. This will go away.
It could continue down to that frontage road, the 9th Avenue Southeast, but the actual entrance onto the highway is what would be looked at closing.
Exactly. This ditch will be closed to a point we won't be able to cross it at some point. Frankly, with the conversations I recall from DOT 10 years ago, I'm surprised it's still open at this point. What I was referencing as 33rd is an area that does, at last conversation with DOT, does meet the spacing requirements or spacing warrants. So if we were to add another intersection or have the ability to go north, it could come back here. Or we could just acknowledge the fact that this is where we can come in. The problem is that with the amount of traffic, funneling it from 31st all the way over to here would not be advisable with this spacing that we've got over here. By the interstate exit. So the bottom line is, within the future land use or the street plan, that shows that actually just shows a couple of options is what it goes into right now. Right now, short-term answer is going to be Willow Creek and working its way toward the east this way. Long-term answer maybe something that becomes more square, and it may come straight up through and off to this area. So as property develops north of 33rd, we do need to be cognizant of the idea as to whether or not that is something we want to reserve, even work with property owner, or if that's something we want to let that idea go. Again, this is the problem when you have your town with the luck and fortune of developing on a correction line. We are 600 feet off from, depending on what side of Highway 212 you're on. So we've got to figure out a way to get our roads back.
Luke?
Yes.
Is that extension of 31st coming down to intersect with Willow Creek Drive on the curve, is that shown in the major street plan?
I believe it was. It was shown, if I remember right, it was shown as an option on there. If it's not, it will be. That was,
Yep, it's shown.
if I recall, it was. I was going to try and pull it up, but I didn't want to find it on the fly while I was doing this.
But it doesn't exist.
I mean, it seems to me with the geography of the land there that makes the most practical sense.
How it's shown on the major street plan is that it exists and that it's a major collector. So, and we do show up by like Eastwoods, where those options for those collector and streets would go, the minor collectors. We should maybe show it dashed.
Because it's not in yet.
Yeah. I mean,
That
it's
is
a really
fine.
short segment.
Yep.
But, so maybe the intent was that it was dashed, but it's just that short.
It used to be. All right, let me write that down.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
One thing I'll add to this discussion too, and I apologize, I'm not familiar with the level of detail of what kind of a transportation master plan we have at hand right now to date, if one at all. Are you familiar, Mayor, our current transportation master plan, if one exists?
Pretty
or
old,
how old it is?
2005.
Okay.
And that's what, I mean, before you came, we talked about having our major street plan be matching our current DOT-adopted functional classification map. And for whatever reason, we need to adopt that as a city, and it should match our major street plan. Those are existing roads on the functional classification, and the major street plan is future roads. But all of our existing roads should line up with whatever the state is calling those roads. We have adopted functional classifications, but then we didn't update
The land use map, major street plan.
our
for
major street
for
plan.
planning purposes.
Right, and the major street plan has consequence. It's referred to, I think, in the,
Subdivision and plating, I mean, that gives you your authority to plat outside your.
I think it's
corporate
referred to in
limits.
state law, that
Yes.
we have to have it, a major street plan. And we do have one.
Yeah.
But it's different from the DOT's functional classification map. It's also different from our own adopted functional classification map. And the transportation area study, the most recent one was 2005, and we need to have another one of those, obviously. But the DOT they're pretty regular at updating their functional classifications.
And I only mention that just as another tool in the toolbox, obviously as far as managing our city streets and routes and future development of them. That transportation master plan, to me, is where you can get more into the weeds on some of these details versus trying to get too detailed in the comprehensive land use plan. Right. Obviously, having the maps identified in the comp plan that we do is valuable and necessary information, right. But the transportation master plan can get all the more detailed.
Agreed. I think, our intent and the purposes I know that Luke's been working on is primarily for plating purposes, that we have our standard policy of what our major and minor collector routes being on quarter section lines and those types of things. But at the same point in time, if we're going to be looking at maybe not having to determine which the best route to be taken, but to look at what our options are, so when a plat does come in before we have something major transportation study done, that we have something to react to. I think was the purpose.
The purpose of the major street plan is that the two-dimensionally, it's going to give us an idea at this point where we plan on having. In a perfect world, we plan on having our grid system this way. Plus, we have, and also what is. We know what is happening, what our current arterials and collectors are. We do need to do the functional class, make sure that they match to there as well. But the other key component to that, the usage part, is that when you do come in and you get a subdivision proposal, we know that on the quarter line, that goes straight north and would be at about where 25th would be, that we need to have a collector as we head north in the area I was just talking about with here. That line is right here, straight north, where right in between
Drainage ponds.
that line, right, that line corresponds right here. And I'm just using this as an example. Please don't think I'm picking on any developers or anything. But as a development comes in, you can see this is Willow Creek Drive heading north. As that goes north, you can see where that connects with the rest of our Eastwoods and that. When a developer comes in, if we get up to that edge where we say, hey, there's supposed to be a collector here, we look at it and say, okay, well, there's supposed to be a collector here. If they say, I don't want to, maybe that's fine as long as they show where it's going to go. But it's the reminder to us, here's where we're at. This is a collector goes here. You're not going to put it there, okay, but we got to make provisions for the fact that it's going to go here or there or
So
somewhere.
for example, at the intersection of 3rd and 19th on the Kinsman property, we've got those 2 quarter sections of ground that will develop residentially, I'm assuming at some point in time. And the natural collector would run right on the quarter line. And that would be the 25th Street that you're referencing.
Will you outline that, Luke?
This
Right.
is the
Yeah.
quarter right here.
So as that traffic goes to the north or to the south off of 3rd Avenue, how do we get it to get up to 14th?
Exactly.
Right, and we need to make sure it passes the straight face test because we don't want to be counting on it on lines on paper, and then when we actually have development getting to that point, we go, well, we don't really want it there, and now there's no more options. And I have looked at that area pretty carefully. It's not, I don't think the right place for that is on the quarter line. And if you look at Dakota Commons, I don't think it's right on the quarter line because Dakota Commons has 1 row of lots, and then you've got a street, and it's just that doesn't pass the straight face test either. We should sit down and work through that and probably update our transportation area study.
Yep, because currently with Dakota Commons too, how the mayor, what the mayor was referencing there about their preliminary plan. So they have a Lewis and Clark trail that would, in essence, serve as the collector, but it would have R1 zoning adjacent to it, and you would have 19th all over again.
That's right. We're
Correct.
going right into it. Okay, they're not there yet. This is the time that we should be
Exactly.
working through
what I
this.
was trying to-
Right. Yep. So those areas that we know don't pass the straight face test, let's work on them a little bit. I mean, we don't want to have to go a quarter of a mile through wetlands that you can't develop on either side. And because, and the impact of putting a road in a wetland and having to do the mitigation and then not having it offset by development adjacent to it, that's silly.
Well, then if you're thinking that, then you're thinking 31st Street becomes the major
I
collector
am
that
thinking
runs
that. That's
north.
exactly what I'm thinking.
And then the minor, the 25th or somewhere that 25th area is a minor collector that's still going to have to generate to collect it back
Right.
on the 3rd or get
It
it
has
over
to dump it out somewhere reasonable.
And
3rd is the natural because
Yes.
of the natural.
Right, I agree.
and 25th really can't serve as the collector beings with where the Eastwoods development went in. And that's where using this document and the comp plan will be really important. So when we're looking at new development, or even with Dakota Commons, when we were with the preliminary plan, that we should look at that and address that before we would approve that preliminary plan.
I think that the property owners of Dakota Commons area have been reminded with the last 3 plats, no more plats until you update your comp plan? Okay, just one more. But no more after that. Okay, just one more. And then, but we're getting to the point now where if we go much further, we're gonna cut off our foot, and we don't wanna do that.
What's the timing and the process look like for going through that update? Similar to this process that we're going through with the comprehensive land use?
Probably not as drawn out. I'm not sure why
It's
this,
more likely either consulting a transportation engineer
Right.
to do a study over a 3 or 6 month period.
right.
and then
It would be
try
a matter of months. And, I mean, it's not in our budget, but it probably should be for 2020.
Yeah, sounds good.
Well, I know the property north of Third Avenue is gonna be looking at being marketed at some point in time in the next 12 to 18 months, maybe 2 years. And so it's really gonna be, important for us to take a look at how that traffic of the 160, 200 acres is gonna flow.
And there's importance to it from the standpoint of understanding that, great, it's a future land use map, it's a future transportation plan, and yes, at some point it'll be there. But as the mayor mentioned, if 31st is going to be that road, we also got to understand that it doesn't do us any good to have our main collector all the way at the bottom of a hill that is not going to develop for many generations, despite the fact that we could see this development in this quarter and density that, have this fully develop. Add all that traffic to how does it get to the big exciting thing that's down here south of Willow Creek? It's got to go back on 19th. So let's just add more traffic to 19th. The bottom line is we got to figure out a way to get it to the south in less than 20 years. So, bottom line is major street plan has provisions to have a collector in this area here. We need to be addressing that as we have development, but the major collector is absolutely positively 31st Street, and that's going to be the big road. And we either need to plan to get people over to that sooner than later, or plan for what that collector is going through there. Right now, the plan has the ability to do both. The first person who says uncle is the one who wins. And so I'll continue until someone does so, and leave it up to you, Mr. Chair.
I'm good to keep going.
Oh,
so.
good. The next redevelopment area in this is also another commercial stretch. And this is we named the I-29 redevelopment area. In the future, of course, that won't necessarily be what we call it, I'm sure, but this is the convergence of about 3 different types of commercial/industrial development that we have. And so just some base references, and so there's a lot of different things going on here. Access to 212 is regulated with DOT's requirements. Direct access to lots is encouraged to be provided via access or service roads, some internal street network, so we're not dumping all the traffic back onto the highway, kind of as you see to a degree with the service roads that we have near the gas station, McDonald's, and motels up there. With regard to right now, we've got a wide variety of sign types that go on up there. It's not just limited to monument type of signs, as is more the direction on Willow Creek. It should be encouraged, though not mandated, at least in portions of it, to adhere similarly to what we see in the overlay district, which would be limit the amount of steel that would face the at least the highway from that standpoint. And then, however, with that ability in some cases, especially as we go farther east of the interstate. Uses requiring large overnight or long-term storage of implements or trucks, basically to do a paving situation similar to what we saw Titan Machinery do, where they pave their customer employee parking, as well as manage their stormwater so that they're able to keep keep things clean as they leave the lot, but allow them some flexibility as they go into the backside there. So that is within that stretch. Frankly, it's going to have several different development types going on there with commercial. Moving along, we get into more commercial development, and this next part is the South 212 redevelopment area, and that basically encompasses everything south of Highway 212 and east of Foley Road, even straddling Foley Road, or Highway 20, depending on how you want to look at it. And with that, get a few points into there. Development of outdoor and indoor recreation facilities should incorporate the plan for playground or other park facilities to serve residents and visitors south of 212. That comes down, and there was a conversation with kind of a joint meeting with Parks and Planning Commission, in which it was that same thing was echoed, and both groups agree that as things are planned down there, and that is the intent as they go down there, because of the fact that I don't know who said it. I might have even said it, that Highway 212, where you don't have stoplights to a pedestrian, could just as well be a river. You're not crossing it. You sure as heck don't want an 8-year-old crossing it. And so the bottom line is, if you do have residences, which you do have a few on the south side, you want to be able to have a place for them to go and have recreation, as well as the idea that we are going to have more people there looking for something to do, as you have a softball field and you have soccer fields. There's got to be an opportunity for little, or frankly big brothers and sisters to go as well as things are going on.
Yeah, so an opportunity we may see with that is if we get a higher density, development in the area, which, we've had some smaller scale ones, but certainly there's opportunity there for a larger one.
Exactly, and likelihood is that it would be, at least in this eastern portion of it, probably the eastern half to 2/3, it would be high density. And trying to work that into it would be important. So with that, then also identifying areas where it would be appropriate to have a mix of commercial and industrial uses. This comes back to there was not one recommended in the document there, but you may be looking at something, maybe the recreation of what used to be the I-1A district, where you've got kind of a more slightly higher building standard for industrial uses, keeping things inside. Honestly, a good model for that is the stretch that is south of Walmart now. You have some that have brick buildings, but they're industrial uses. They limit some of their loading and their parking and their storage outside. Those are good examples, and frankly, that would be something that if you're limiting the intensity of industrial use as well, I know there have been recreational uses floating looking for homes as well. That would be an area that could also be combined as well for that, because you're going to limit the heavy industrial in those areas and have it down to more, whether it be to a degree, frankly, probably contractor sort of work.
How far does the overlay district go in that area? Does it extend past 212?
It does not. It only goes as far south as Highway 212. Okay. It does not cross 212.
Also, Luke, I noticed looking ahead at the redevelopment map, that area, to describe it, along the south bypass, west of the railroad, that little pie-shaped property in the blue on your slide there.
Somewhere over here? What are we talking about? Here? There?
Where's your mouse?
Oh, you don't see it? Oh, that would explain why you don't know what I'm talking about. You tell me. Do we have a laser? I can't. How do I? Oh, there we go. Thank you. Here?
Up on 212 and the south bypass, like kitty corner from the Prairie Stop.
Right here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Right there.
I noticed that anything adjacent to 212 was, for the most part, looked at as being redeveloped as commercial, except that was left industrial. And I think that would be a good area for redevelopment for more commercial uses, with it being, and yes, the railroad is there, but the railroad and Glacial Lakes Energy. But I think that could be the boundary between redevelopment to commercial, with it being adjacent to a major collector and a minor collector. With showing that on the map as the mixed use.
And right now it is not shown as mixed use
No.
between commercial and industrial?
Yeah.
I would agree with you in that, because it would, and plus there are currently, right now, it's a use that is commercial in nature anyway,
Right.
albeit oriented toward industrial. Same thing as when ProBuild was there, or UBC before.
Right.
So I would agree with you, Brandy. I better write that down though, because I'll forget.
I'll remind you.
Thank you.
Making a list.
There we go. Okay. Recommendation to encourage and enhance perimeter landscaping and screening where industrial uses border residential zoning districts and/or arterial or collector streets. Fundamental point there is that doesn't mean you can't have different types of siding requirements or siding or even loading, but attempting to screen them from at least our arterial streets as they come through. And same thing with as these uses butt up against industrial or residential properties. The first commercial redevelopment area in there, and actually the only one that's listed here, covers about the whole thing. Just referenced it as a vastly expanded version of the Magic Mile is what it amounts to. It's Magic 2 miles here. Encourage zoning designations which allow commercial retail uses. You have that right now. Certain industrial uses may be allowed as long as certain aesthetic and operation criteria are met. A lot of it is with regards to storage visible from the highway. Review whether it's necessary for certain intersections to consider vacation. Specifically, what I'm referencing is that we have a lot of roads that intersect on Highway 212 that go in all directions. And there may be some cases where it makes good sense to just let them go. Property back to the property owners, let them handle and perhaps even use and improve those properties. We obviously have to be smart with how we do that so that we're not cutting off access, but that's something I think we need to look at and encourage if it fits into our plan. May need to decrease minimum lot area requirements to better suit existing and future development in those areas. There was a non-conforming lot study that was performed shortly after the last land use plan was completed. Yes, and a large portion adjacent to Highway 212, not all the way over to 19th, probably closer to 17th. You see a lot of lots that do not meet our C3 lot area requirements, which in all reality should make things difficult for them to build, and it does, is the bottom line. So that's why you do have a laundry list. One of the reasons you have a laundry list of things when someone comes in for a conditional use in the C3, relaxation of perimeter trees and setting things and screening and storage. So to be able to ratchet some of that down.
I think similar to the intersection deal, the way that the streets are oriented there, it makes a lot of them lots abnormal.
Mm-hmm.
Not ideal.
It does. The other issue that we face in there, and I know it's been brought up in reference to, honestly, sign discussions that we've had in the past, is that when the Magic Mile was platted and lots along Highway 212 were platted, they were platted along the same size as we have downtown. 25 to 50 foot wide lots, 50, maybe 75 on a big one. A lot of them through there. So consequently, we have a lot of lots there as well that we've got to serve and future to split. So it really makes it tricky with regards to the size, as we mentioned.
And Luke, if I could interject on the Highway 212 intersection discussion, with the upcoming 2 phases of 212 reconstruction, I know the DOT will be eliminating a handful of those intersections and creating safer realignments of a couple of the existing intersections as well. And that's something that we've been in review with them, and they, of course, have been in conversation in regards to the property owners that would be affected. And I don't have a list of those specifically with me here tonight, but I do know that there are some that will be affected by the DOT project.
Maybe the comp plan can reference that reconstruction project just as for redevelopment purposes. I mean, it'll be completed within, I don't know, when is it going to be completed? 2022?
Probably 2022 by the time both phases are 100% complete, yeah.
So I don't know if it's necessary or not, but.
Or otherwise generally reference in relation to those intersections, coordination with the DOT, because they obviously play a role in that as well.
That was actually what I just written down, is coordination of infrastructure as well as transportation planning issues with the DOT as construction completes. There were a couple other portions in there that I want to point out, and really what it does, a couple of the middle bullets with a lot of words in there, they set up and they may scare some folks with regards to identifying issues here and how to go ahead and pay for it. But the bottom line is that really what those couple of bullets are identified for is to set up the ability to, though not actually establish, which is kind of a general recommendation that encourage groups at intersections or clusters or small groups to maybe have what we, in theory, what we'd have with the Uptown redevelopment area, encourage groups to do similar things with regards to the same area, to upgrade, whether it be facade updates or things like that, so that if one business is doing a facade update or they're doing a construction project, that perhaps there would be dollars available to update their parking lot where they've only got gravel, or to improve other types of siding as well. Again, that's not something that the Planning Commission is going to be forcing someone to do, but it's an encouragement for folks to work together and see if they can go ahead and do that. And that's kind of a little outside the box thinking, but it really just kind of lays the groundwork. This cluster, that cluster, try to work together as they do so. Where that came from was the bullet above that, which came from a meeting several years ago when we were sitting in a room trying to figure out just how do we get these lots where they're making a small improvement, they're making things look better. How do we make it so that we're not saying, well, thank you for doing that, but you need to spend another $50,000 to pave your lot too while you're at it. And while we want them to do that, it's also very nice that they're improving their building or vice versa. So trying to design or determine at what point do we trigger certain types of things, and this really just lays the groundwork for establishing what that is at some point in the future. And that may be something you establish as a planning board to figure out if you spend this percentage on a facade increase, then you're also gonna spend a certain percentage on landscaping as well. It could be something like that.
To really enforce that, it'd have to be written into ordinance.
Exactly. This is really just a
guiding.
Like I said, it's a recommendation to review whether or not you do that as it goes on. Narrowly focused redevelopment efforts throughout those, that was with the fine-tooth comb. And then in some cases to allow for mixed uses in certain conditions. Again, that would be probably at clustered locations. We do have an instance like that at Maple and 212, where we've got a good opportunity, and that's been done in the past. So I will call Uncle if you don't want to, and move to before we head to the Lake Pelican. And with that, I will tell you I won't go through as much painstaking detail, because what I want to next time is I want to make sure we get through the map itself and talk about that next time.
Sounds good to me, Luke. Thank you. And then at that next meeting as well, Brandy, I know you've been taking notes. You'd talked about having kind of a summary of the updates as well that you've been gathering.
Yeah, so then, and how we handled that, the first two meetings is then we approved the changes and then for Luke to incorporate. So I'll have that. Luke will not be here on the December 20th meeting, so we will, take off again on the beginning of the year at the January 4th meeting,
Sounds good.
or 3rd. No, it's January 3rd. So,
All right, we'll move on to item 6 is open public comment submittal, and I don't see anybody in the audience. So we'll move on to new business. Any new business? It's open for you if you want it done. Any new business, Brandy?
no, not
Old
that I have.
business?
No.
I have
No
a
executive.
question on old business.
Sure.
Was there a joint meeting with the Parks Board?
There was a joint
Yes.
meeting last week.
Yep.
And what was the result, or what was the discussion?
So basically, I mean, I have my notes from it. Let me grab it. Of the takeaway points.
Some of these takeaway points that we discussed, we'll definitely want to incorporate into our comprehensive land use plan. So I think they'll fall into those meetings in January before we finalize anything.
Anyone else that was there can certainly go over, can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but in being at that meeting, the primary takeaway that I had that I know we'll be planning to incorporate in the land use plan is that dedication of parks with regards to subdivision, the determination and location of those would move up to the sketch plan level as opposed to waiting until the preliminary plan or even the closing of that process, so that is viewed more similarly to an infrastructure improvement as opposed to, and some feeling, at least it's been said before in other company, that point out that sometimes it feels like what's left goes to the park, and we want to make sure that we're planning around parks, not just
So it's
sticking parks
moving
where
up
they
on
go.
the priority list.
In the time frame
Essentially.
as to when they're planning it.
All right.
Exactly.
That's great.
Yep.
The impression I got was that it was just basically to increase the priority of the establishment of parks.
Yeah,
And
so-
at what point the developer is looking at it and then incorporating it into, so it'll be a conceptual plan where it's not, the park board and plan commission won't be presented it at the preliminary plan phase when they've already put a bunch of engineering efforts into their plans. It's going to be more of a blank slate. We're looking at developing this. We want to present a concept plan and then addressing that with the park board right away as just the land itself and where they would see the most ideal location for a park to go.
The other aspect of it is kind of some forward looking of what our expectations are on where we would expect to see a park. So we talked a lot about the half mile spacing with the parks, or being able to get to a park within a half a mile, I should say, which puts it basically at one park per quarter section. So in our older parts of town where we have a lot of parks developed and some really nice parks, we've pretty much hit that in every neighborhood. We do have some examples of some existing developments where we've not hit that mark, and so this would really firm up that language of what our expectations are. In fact, we talked a little bit about, and I'd really like to see it, is some even some areas picked out on a map where they would be an ideal state of having a park in advance. So a developer coming in to develop a specific area of land may know what the expectations are before they put any money into it.
Right, and where it's with the radius or the diameters of that half a mile where they're actually necessary to be within a 10-minute walk of any neighborhood. And we talked a little bit about ordinance amendments, different language, and then for sure in our Title 14, we need to tighten that language up with reference to the money in lieu of the parkland, because it's way off the mark and we would rather see that land be dedicated. But if there was a circumstance that it made more sense to collect cash in lieu, that we had something a little more I don't know what the word I'm really thinking of, but concrete, that it's not so open to interpretation on at what point we're collecting it and how much, and who's determining it.
One of the things that I was pleased to hear, I was talking to one of the Park and Rec Board members that was at this meeting, and I was told that one of the outcomes of these new ideas would be to get the Planning Commission and the Park Board closer to being on the same page, which in the past has been somewhat of a disconnect, I was pleased to hear that. So.
Yep.
Yeah, and in the change in the process and bringing it earlier into play, I think will help drive a lot of that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very good discussion.
Yep. Yep, so we'll incorporate some of those things into the comp plan, and I'll have that list with, everything that we've discussed to be added.
And then, and certainly coming out of that, we'll have some ordinance change requirements that the board will be seeing at some point early next year then as well.
Yep. Yeah, there will be a lot of ordinance amendments next year.
Yeah. A lot of things brewing, so. Any additional business?
Don's giving me the signal.
All right.
Motion to adjourn.
No executive session.
Go.
Take a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
I think Stein got it. A second by Colhane. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you, everybody.